I gazed at the notification banner on my phone, the blue glow illuminating my face in the dim light of my apartment. Effective immediately, your position at Veritas Publishing has been terminated. Company items must be returned by Friday. HR. Will be in touch. A text message. 8 years at the company and Marcus Reynolds couldn't even call me. I set the phone down on my marble countertop and smiled. Today was the day everything changed. No more pretending to be Olivia Taylor, the unassuming senior editor who took notes in meetings and stayed late without complaint. The board meeting was tomorrow, and Marcus had no idea that the building housing his precious publishing empire had belonged to me for the past 3 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown apartment. I sipped my coffee and reviewed the documents one final time. The lease termination notice was printed on heavy cream stationery, the company letterhead of Horizon Properties, my company, gleaming at the top. 3 years of careful planning had led to this moment. 3 years of watching Marcus Reynolds dismantle talented writing careers and steal credit for other people's creativity, while I quietly positioned every piece on the board. I smoothed down my tailored navy suit and tucked the envelope into my leather portfolio. The irony wasn't lost on me. Being fired via text message had actually accelerated my timeline. I'd planned to wait another month, but Marcus's callousness had changed that. His impulsive decision would cost him everything. Veritas Publishing occupied the top 4 floors of the Riverview Tower, a gleaming glass structure in the heart of Portland's Pearl District. The building represented everything Marcus valued: prestige, visibility, power. He'd fought tooth and nail to secure the lease when it came available, outbidding 3 other publishing houses in the process. What he never discovered was that Horizon Properties was a shell company I'd established using my inheritance and the settlement money from my previous wrongful termination suit. I hadn't always been calculating. 7 years ago, I was simply Olivia Bennett, editorial director at Luminary Press, Marcus's first publishing venture. I'd discovered Charlotte Freeman, a brilliant but unknown author whose debut novel had transformed the company's fortunes. The book had sold millions, been translated into 27 languages, and was being adapted for film. Throughout the meteoric rise, Marcus had systematically removed my name from contracts, correspondence, and credits. By the time Charlotte's book hit the bestseller list, Marcus had convinced the board I was expendable. He fired me the day before. Bonuses were distributed, ensuring I wouldn't see a penny of the success I'd created. The elevator doors opened onto the 30th floor of Riverview Tower. Despite my termination, my keycard still worked, an oversight that perfectly captured Marcus's management style. Impulsive decisions without attention to detail. The receptionist's eyes widened as I walked confidently through the glass doors of Veritas Publishing. "Ms. Taylor, I thought we received an email this morning that you were no longer with the company?" I finished for her, my voice calm. "That's correct, Zoe. I'm just here to return some items and collect my personal belongings. Is Marcus in yet?" "He's in the conference room with the executive team. There's a quarterly review meeting." Her voice lowered. "Everyone was shocked about what happened. It doesn't seem right after everything you've done for this place." I nodded, appreciating her loyalty. "Things aren't always what they seem, Zoe. Sometimes the story takes an unexpected turn." I glanced toward the conference room. "Would you mind if I left something on Marcus's desk? It's just some paperwork he'll need." "Of course not. His office is unlocked." I made my way through the open workspace, acknowledging the surprised looks and murmured greetings from my former colleagues. Their confusion was understandable. Terminated employees were typically escorted out by security, not allowed to wander freely through the office. But then, Marcus had never bothered to establish proper protocols. His corner office was exactly what you'd expect. ostentatious, with awards prominently displayed and a desk larger than most dining tables. The wall of windows offered a panoramic view of the city and the river beyond. I placed the envelope squarely in the center of his desk, positioning it so it would be the first thing he saw upon his return. As I turned to leave, my eyes caught on a familiar manuscript, Charlotte Freeman's latest novel. The cover page bore Marcus's editorial notes, his distinctive scrawl claiming changes that would undoubtedly diminish her unique voice. Some habits never changed. I exited his office. Just as the conference room doors opened, executives filed out, their expressions serious as they discussed quarterly projections. Marcus emerged last, his tall frame commanding attention in his custom-tailored suit. He froze when he spotted me, his momentary surprise quickly replaced by smug authority. "Olivia," he said, voice carrying across the open office space. "I believe your employment has been terminated. You shouldn't be here." I smiled pleasantly. "Just returning company property and collecting my things, Marcus. I'll be out of your way shortly." His eyes narrowed. "Security should have been called. Who let you in?" "Your keycard system is still active. Perhaps next time you fire someone via text message, you might want to follow up with proper security protocols." I maintained eye contact, refusing to be intimidated. But then, attention to detail was never your strong suit, was it? A flush crept up his neck as conversations around us quieted. Office drama was always the best spectator sport. My office. Now. He turned sharply and strode toward his corner domain, expecting obedience as always. I followed, feeling the eyes of the entire floor on us. Marcus Reynolds, the great publishing magnate, was about to discover the consequences of his carelessness. I closed the door behind me as he circled his desk, already shifting into lecture mode. Then he spotted the envelope. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What's this?" he demanded, picking it up. "Something that requires your immediate attention." He tore it open impatiently, scanning the contents with increasing disbelief. The color drained from his face as he reached the second page. "This is ridiculous," he finally sputtered. "A lease termination? Eviction within 30 days? This can't be legal." "I assure you, it's entirely legal. The terms are quite clear in the original lease agreement, which you clearly didn't read thoroughly before signing. Section 12, Paragraph 4 specifically states that the landlord reserves the right to terminate the lease with 30 days' notice if the tenant engages in business practices deemed unethical or harmful to the reputation of the property." "What the hell are you talking about? This is from Horizon Properties." His eyes narrowed with sudden suspicion. "What do you have to do with this?" I settled into the chair across from his desk, crossing my legs comfortably. "Horizon Properties is my company, Marcus. I've owned this building for the past 3 years." The stunned silence that followed was everything I'd imagined. Marcus stared at me as though seeing me for the first time. "That's impossible," he finally managed. "You're an editor. You couldn't afford—" "I'm many things you never bothered to discover," I corrected him. "My family's real estate portfolio is quite extensive. When this building came on the market, it seemed like an excellent investment opportunity. Imagine my surprise when Veritas Publishing submitted a lease application." His expression hardened. "So this is revenge? For what happened at Luminary?" "Not revenge. Consequences. There's a difference." I nodded toward the documents in his hand. "You've violated multiple ethical clauses in your lease agreement. I have documented evidence of employee harassment, intellectual property theft, and accounting irregularities, all of which constitute grounds for termination under the terms you signed." Marcus slammed the papers down. "This won't stand. I have the best lawyers in the city." "By all means, challenge it. That would give me the opportunity to present my evidence in court. including your systematic credit theft from Charlotte Freeman and at least 7 other authors. I wonder how your shareholders would react to that publicity." His jaw clenched. "What do you want? Money?" The question was so predictable it almost made me laugh. Men like Marcus always believed everything could be bought. "I don't want your money. I want accountability." I leaned forward slightly. "Veritas Publishing will vacate these premises within 30 days. Additionally, you will issue public retractions acknowledging the true editorial contributions to Charlotte Freeman's work and the other authors whose careers you've claimed to build. Full creative credit will be restored to the appropriate parties." "You're insane! That would destroy my reputation in the industry." "Your reputation should reflect your actions, don't you think?" He stood abruptly, looming over the desk. "Get out of my office. My legal team will handle this farce." I remained seated, unfazed by his attempt at intimidation. "There's more, Marcus. The board meeting tomorrow, I believe you're presenting the new 5-year strategy?" Suspicion flickered across his face. "How do you know about that?" "Because I'll be there. You see, Horizon Properties holds a significant stake in Veritas Publishing. We've been quietly acquiring shares for the past 18 months. Combined with the proxy votes I've secured from other shareholders who've grown concerned about your leadership, we now effectively control the board." This revelation hit him harder than the lease termination. Marcus Reynolds, who prided himself on controlling every aspect of his business, hadn't noticed the gradual shift in ownership happening right under his nose. "That's not possible," he whispered, but the certainty had drained from his voice. "The shareholders' register doesn't lie." I finally stood, smoothing my suit jacket. "The board will be voting on new leadership tomorrow. I've prepared a comprehensive presentation on the company's future direction, including a complete restructuring of editorial credits and compensation." Marcus sank back into his chair, the reality of his situation finally setting in. "You planned this, all of it. For how long?" "Since the day you took credit for discovering Charlotte Freeman." I moved toward the door. "You fired me via text message this morning, Marcus. By this time tomorrow, the board will return the favor." His face contorted with anger. "You won't get away with this. I built this company." "You built it on other people's talent and creativity," I corrected him. "And now those same people will rebuild it without you." As I opened the door, the hushed conversations in the open office immediately ceased. Every eye was on us, the power dynamic visibly shifted. I turned back to Marcus one last time. "Oh, and Marcus? The severance package you'll be offered is far more generous than the nothing you gave me. Consider it a lesson in professional courtesy." I walked through the office with my head high, feeling lighter than I had in years. Revenge had never been my primary motivation. Justice was. The publishing industry was built on creative talent, yet those who did the actual creating were too often pushed aside by those who merely packaged and sold their work. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter for Veritas Publishing, one where credit and compensation would flow to those who earned it. Outside, the spring air felt crisp and invigorating. I checked my phone to find several messages from board members confirming our meeting the following day. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The final piece would fall into place tomorrow when Marcus discovered that Charlotte Freeman herself would be joining the board as creative director. Her contract with Veritas was ironclad, another detail Marcus had overlooked, but her loyalty had always been to the editor who had believed in her from the beginning. I had waited years for this moment, carefully assembling the pieces of a puzzle Marcus never knew existed. The building acquisition had been the cornerstone. Control the physical space, and you gain leverage over everything that happens within it. But the true masterpiece had been the quiet accumulation of shares, the patient building of alliances with other shareholders, and the meticulous documentation of every ethical violation and credit theft. As I walked toward the riverfront, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. When Marcus had fired me from Luminary Press, I'd been devastated, not just by the loss of income, but by having my contributions erased. For months, I'd watched Charlotte's book climb the bestseller lists while Marcus gave interviews about his discovery of her talent. The injustice had eaten at me until I realized that anger alone would change nothing. Strategic action was required. My family's real estate business had provided the foundation, knowledge of property law, investment capital, and connections to key financial players. I'd created Horizon Properties as a separate entity, ensuring no connection could be traced. Back to me. When Riverview Tower came on the market, I'd moved quickly, recognizing its value as both an investment and a strategic asset. Learning that Marcus was expanding Veritas Publishing and seeking prestigious new office space had seemed like fate. I'd ensured that my property company offered terms just attractive enough to secure his interest, then watched as his ego led him to sign a lease he barely reviewed. The ethical conduct clauses buried in the legal language were extensive and specific, designed precisely for the violations I knew he routinely committed. My phone rang, Charlotte Freeman's name flashing on the screen. "Is it done?" she asked without preamble. "Phase 1 is complete," I confirmed. "He received the eviction notice. Tomorrow we present to the board." "And he had no idea?" I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. None whatsoever. The look on his face when he realized I owned the building was priceless. Charlotte laughed. "I wish I could have seen it. I've been waiting years to see Marcus Reynolds get what he deserves." "You'll get your chance tomorrow. Are you ready for your new role?" "Creative director with actual authority and credit?" "I've been preparing my whole career. The other authors are on board too. We've created a completely new editorial structure that ensures transparent attribution and fair compensation." Her enthusiasm warmed me. This had never been solely about bringing down Marcus Reynolds. It was about building something better from the ruins of his exploitative system. "I'll see you tomorrow then," I said. 9 a.m. at the downtown Meridian. Hotel, Conference Room B. The board members will arrive at 8:30. After we disconnected, I continued my walk along the riverfront, watching the afternoon light play across the water. Tomorrow would bring a new beginning for Veritas Publishing and for all the creative talents whose work had built the company's success. As for Marcus Reynolds, he would learn that true power didn't come from taking credit for others' work. It came from recognizing and honoring the contributions that created collective success. The journey had been long, but the satisfaction of seeing justice served would make every careful step worthwhile. I hadn't set out for revenge. I'd aimed for reformation. The publishing industry needed to change, and sometimes change required a catalyst. Tomorrow, that catalyst would finally ignite. The next morning, I woke before my alarm, a strange electricity humming through me. The weight of yesterday's confrontation with Marcus had settled into a calm determination. I moved through my morning routine with deliberate precision. Shower, coffee, the charcoal suit I'd chosen specifically for today. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. at the Meridian Hotel, neutral territory where Marcus couldn't control the environment, perfect for what was about to unfold. As I applied a final touch of lipstick, my phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. "He's been calling everyone on the board all night. Getting desperate. See you soon." I smiled at my reflection. Marcus Reynolds, the man who built his reputation on stealing other people's ideas, was about to discover just how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. For years, he had operated under the assumption that quiet people were easy targets. He never understood that silence could be strategic. The Meridian Hotel stood in the heart of downtown, its limestone facade glowing gold in the morning sun. As I entered the lobby, I spotted several board members already gathered near the coffee station. Patricia Winters, the silver-haired venture capitalist who'd been skeptical of Marcus's expansion plans. James Chen, whose family's publishing investments stretched back 3 generations. And Robert Daniels, the financial analyst whose questions about profit margins had irritated Marcus at the last quarterly review. "Olivia," Patricia called, gesturing me over. "Quite the development yesterday. Marcus has been making some rather extraordinary claims." I set my portfolio on the table and accepted the cup of coffee James offered. "I imagine he has. What's he telling you?" James leaned in, lowering his voice. "That you orchestrated some kind of elaborate revenge scheme. That you secretly bought the building to sabotage him. He's demanding we shut down this meeting." "And yet you're all here," I observed. Patricia's eyes sparkled with amusement. "We're curious. When a CEO starts making frantic calls at midnight, intelligent investors pay attention. Besides, your presentation proposal was most intriguing." Robert nodded agreement. "Particularly the financial projections for the restructured editorial department. If your numbers hold up, the profitability increase would be substantial." Before I could respond, the elevator doors opened, revealing Charlotte Freeman. Across the lobby, her presence commanded attention, not with volume or flamboyance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth. Several board members straightened as she approached, clearly surprised by her appearance. "Ms. Freeman," Patricia greeted her warmly, "I wasn't aware you'd be joining us today." Charlotte smiled, extending her hand. "I'm here at Olivia's invitation. I believe my perspective might be valuable for what you're about to discuss." The subtle shift in the atmosphere was palpable. Charlotte Freeman wasn't just Veritas Publishing's most successful author. She was literary royalty whose opinion carried immense weight. Her presence immediately legitimized whatever was about to happen. "Shall we head upstairs?" I suggested, checking my watch. "The meeting begins in 15 minutes. Conference room B had been arranged exactly as I'd specified, a U-shaped table configuration that would place Marcus at the open end, visible to everyone. The presentation materials waited on a side table, and the catering staff had laid out pastries, fruit, and additional coffee. Everything was perfect. Charlotte touched my arm as the board members filed in. "Are you ready for this?" "I've been ready for 7 years," I replied quietly. "What about you? Once we do this, there's no going back to the way things were." She gazed around the room, her expression thoughtful. "I've published 8 novels, with Veritas. Each one has made Marcus millions while he cut corners on everyone who actually created the books. Editors, designers, marketing staff. I'm done watching him take credit for other people's brilliance." The door opened again, and the remaining board members entered, followed by Marcus Reynolds himself. He'd clearly had a sleepless night, his usually immaculate appearance slightly rumpled, dark circles visible beneath his eyes. When he spotted Charlotte standing beside me, he faltered mid-stride. "What is she doing here?" he demanded, addressing the room at large. "This is a closed board meeting." Patricia took her seat at the head of the table. "Ms. Freeman is here at my invitation, Marcus. As our most valuable author, her insights into the company's future direction are certainly relevant." It was a small lie. I had arranged Charlotte's invitation, but Patricia delivered it with such smooth authority that Marcus couldn't challenge it without appearing petty. "Fine," he snapped, taking his position at the far end of the U-shaped arrangement. "But before we begin, I need to address the situation regarding Olivia Taylor. She should not be part of these proceedings." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Taylor, or should I say Ms. Bennett, is here representing Horizon Properties, which now holds a significant stake in this company. Her presence is not only appropriate, but necessary. The correction of my name, acknowledging my true identity, as Olivia Bennett rather than the Olivia Taylor persona I'd adopted at Veritas, was a subtle but powerful signal. Patricia was declaring her awareness of the full situation. Marcus's face flushed. "This is absurd. She orchestrated a hostile takeover." "I believe the term is strategic investment," James Chen interjected mildly. and, according to the shareholders' register, all acquisitions were conducted legally through proper channels. "She bought the building to evict us!" Patricia tapped her pen against the table. "Marcus, I've reviewed the lease termination notice. The ethical conduct clauses you agreed to are quite standard for commercial properties of this caliber. If you violated those terms, that's hardly the fault of the property owner." The systematic dismantling of his objections was beautiful to witness. For years, Marcus had controlled narratives through sheer force of personality, bullying, and maneuvering until he got his way. Now, faced with methodical opposition from multiple directions, he was floundering. "We have a full agenda," I said, moving toward the presentation materials. "Perhaps we should begin with the financial overview?" For the next 30 minutes, I presented a comprehensive analysis of Veritas Publishing's current position and future prospects. The data spoke for itself. Under Marcus's leadership, profits had increased, but almost entirely through cost-cutting, measures that sacrificed quality and staff retention. Meanwhile, competing publishers who invested in their creative teams were showing stronger long-term growth. The fundamental problem, I concluded, is a business model that systematically undervalues the very people who create the product we sell. When editors, designers, and marketing staff aren't properly credited or compensated for their contributions, we lose talent and ultimately market share. Robert Daniels leaned forward. "Your projection shows a 22% increase in profitability over 3 years with this new model. That seems optimistic." "It's actually conservative," Charlotte interjected, standing to join me at the presentation board. "I've consulted with 12 major authors currently under contract with Veritas. Every single one would commit to additional projects under the proposed credit and compensation structure. That alone would increase output by approximately 30%. Marcus scoffed. "Authors don't understand business operations. This is fantasy." Charlotte's smile was razor-sharp. "Actually, Marcus, my business degree from Wharton suggests otherwise. Before becoming a novelist, I worked in corporate finance for 7 years. Unlike you, I've reviewed these projections in detail." Another piece of information Marcus had never bothered to learn about the people who generated his wealth. His dismissive assumptions had always been his blind spot. Patricia turned to the other board members. "I find these projections compelling, particularly the retention statistics. We've lost 11 senior editors in the past 2 years alone. The cost of that turnover is substantial." "This is a coup," Marcus declared, standing abruptly. "Orchestrated by a disgruntled former employee and an author who's clearly forgotten who made her career possible." The room fell silent. Charlotte took a measured breath before responding. "Olivia Bennett discovered my manuscript after it had been rejected by 16 other publishers, including your first reader at Luminary Press. She personally edited the draft that became The Echo Chamber. She developed the marketing strategy that positioned it for success. Yet when it hit the bestseller list, your name was on the press releases. Your interviews claimed credit for finding and developing my voice." Charlotte turned to address the entire board. "This isn't about one editor or one author. It's about a systemic problem in publishing where credit flows upward to executives while those doing the actual creative work remain invisible. Olivia's proposed restructuring fixes that fundamental imbalance." Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "This is emotional manipulation, not business. Veritas Publishing operates exactly like every other successful publishing house." "That's precisely the problem," I said quietly. "The industry standard is broken. We have an opportunity to pioneer a more sustainable model, one where transparency and proper attribution drive both creativity and profit." James Chen, who had been silent for most of the meeting, finally spoke. "I've reviewed the complete proposal, including the lease situation. My family has been in publishing for 3 generations, and we've witnessed multiple paradigm shifts in the industry. What Ms. Bennett and Ms. Freeman are proposing isn't radical, it's evolutionary. an adjustment that addresses long-standing inequities while potentially increasing our competitive advantage. One by one, the other board members nodded agreement. The momentum was shifting visibly, and Marcus knew it. His expression hardened as he made one final attempt to regain control. This company exists because of my leadership. I built Veritas from nothing. You're suggesting we upend everything based on unproven theories from someone I fired for incompetence. The desperate accusation hung in the air for a moment before Patricia responded. Actually, Marcus, we have documentation indicating Ms. Bennett was terminated from Luminary Press the day before receiving her acquisition bonus for Charlotte Freeman's first novel. That timing seems suspiciously convenient, particularly given the success that followed. She slid a folder across the table toward him. These are copies of the original editorial notes and acquisition memos for The Echo Chamber. Ms. Bennett's contributions are extensively documented, yet her name appears nowhere in the public materials following publication. Marcus didn't touch the folder. His face had paled considerably. Furthermore, Patricia continued, we've received statements from 7 other authors describing similar patterns of credit reassignment. In each case, editors who identified promising manuscripts were sidelined once success was established. This is a character assassination, Marcus protested, but his voice had lost its authoritative edge. No, I corrected him. This is accountability. For 7 years, you've built your reputation by taking credit for other people's work. The lease termination is simply the first consequence. Patricia tapped her pen against her legal pad. I believe we've heard enough to proceed to a vote. The proposal before us has 2 components. First, the acceptance of Marcus Reynolds' resignation as CEO of Veritas Publishing, and second, the implementation of the restructuring plan presented by Ms. Bennett, including her appointment as interim CEO during the transition period. Marcus stared in disbelief. Resignation? I haven't resigned. That's true, Patricia acknowledged. However, given the evidence presented regarding ethical violations, the same violations cited in your building lease termination, the board has the authority to request your resignation or proceed with termination for cause. The former would be less disruptive for the company and more dignified for you. The strategic brilliance of Patricia's approach left me momentarily in awe. She was offering Marcus a choice between resignation, which would preserve at least a portion of his professional reputation, or termination with a public airing of all his ethical violations. It was a chess move that left him with no viable countermove. The silence stretched as Marcus absorbed the reality of his position. Finally, his shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. You've turned them all against me, he said, his eyes fixed on me. Years of planning for revenge. Was it worth it? This isn't about revenge, I replied evenly. It's about building something better than what you destroyed. Every person whose career you damaged deserves restoration. Every idea you appropriated deserves proper attribution. This isn't ending something, Marcus. It's beginning something new. Patricia cleared her throat. The vote, then. All in favor of accepting Marcus Reynolds' resignation and implementing the proposed restructuring plan? One by one, hands raised around the table. James Chen, Robert Daniels, Elizabeth Forrester, Michael Townsend. Every single board member voted in favor. The motion passes unanimously, Patricia declared. Marcus, you will be provided with the standard executive separation agreement. Your office must be cleared by the end of the week. Olivia, the board officially appoints you as interim CEO, effective immediately. Marcus stood slowly, straightening, his jacket with deliberate movements. His expression was unreadable as he gathered his materials. You won't succeed, he said finally. This industry eats idealists alive. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but I'd rather fail trying to build something ethical than succeed by taking credit for other people's work. He had no response to that. With a last look around the table, seeking sympathy or support he wouldn't find, Marcus Reynolds walked out of the conference room, leaving behind the company he'd built on stolen ideas and misappropriated credit. As the door closed behind him, the atmosphere in the room visibly lightened. Board members began talking animatedly about implementation timelines and communication strategies. Charlotte squeezed my hand under the table. "You did it," she whispered. "Everything you planned, exactly as you envisioned." I shook my head. Slightly. We did it. This was never just about me. It was about everyone whose contributions were erased. Patricia approached, extending her hand. "Congratulations, Olivia. Or should I call you CEO Bennett now?" "Olivia is fine," I assured her, standing to shake her hand. "Thank you for your support. I know this transition won't be simple." "The best transformations never are," she replied, with a knowing smile. "But I've reviewed your full plan. It's meticulously constructed. Marcus never realized what he had in you. That was his greatest mistake." As the meeting concluded and board members filed out with promises of support, for the transition I remained in the conference room, absorbing the monumental shift that had just occurred. 7 years ago, I'd stood in the Luminary Press parking lot with my personal belongings in a cardboard box, watching Marcus Reynolds take credit for my greatest professional achievement. Today, I'd taken back not just my own narrative, but created space for others to reclaim theirs as well. Charlotte returned from walking Patricia to the elevator, her expression thoughtful. "What happens now? With the building, I mean. Will you really evict the company you just took over?" I smiled. The eviction notice served its purpose. Horizon Properties will offer Veritas Publishing a new lease, with the same ethical conduct clauses, but far more favorable financial terms. The savings will fund part of the editorial department restructuring. She laughed. "You really did think of everything." "I had 7 years to plan," I reminded her. "But the real work begins now. Transforming a corporate culture isn't accomplished through a single board vote. We need to demonstrate that ethical publishing is also profitable publishing. If anyone can do it, you can." Charlotte gathered her notes. "I should get back to my manuscript. My editor is expecting revisions by Friday." "About that," I said, "I hope your new position as creative director won't interfere with your writing schedule. The company still needs your novels." She paused at the door. "My writing has always been about giving voice to people whose stories go untold. This new role feels like an extension of that mission." Her expression grew serious. "What Marcus never understood is that success isn't a zero-sum game. Recognizing others' contributions doesn't diminish your own achievements. It amplifies them." As Charlotte departed, I stood alone in the conference room, looking out at the Portland skyline. The Riverview Tower was visible in the distance, sunlight glinting off its glass facade. 7 years ago, owning that building had seemed an impossible dream, a symbolic goal that kept me focused during the darkest moments. Now, standing on the threshold of everything I'd worked toward, I understood that buildings and titles were never the true objective. The real victory was creating a system where credit flowed to its rightful recipients, where creative work was valued appropriately, and where success was measured not just in profit margins, but in sustainable, ethical practices. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Change never was. But for the first time in 7 years, I was exactly where I needed to be. Not hiding, not pretending, but fully stepping into the role I'd prepared for all along. Marcus Reynolds had fired me via text message, never imagining I already owned the building housing his empire. But the true ownership that mattered wasn't of physical space. It was of narrative, of ideas, and of the future we were about to create. The first week as interim CEO of Veritas Publishing passed in a whirlwind of activity. I'd moved into the corner office, not Marcus's former space with its ostentatious furnishings, but a smaller, glass-walled room overlooking the editorial floor. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Leadership should be visible and accessible, not isolated behind closed doors. The transition team had worked tirelessly implementing the first phase of our restructuring plan. New attribution policies were already in place, ensuring that every person who contributed to a book's development would receive proper credit, both internally and in public materials. The compensation structure had been revised to include profit sharing for editorial teams when their acquisitions succeeded. Most importantly, the culture was beginning to shift, slowly, cautiously, but perceptibly. On Friday afternoon, as golden sunlight slanted through the windows, I looked up from budget projections to find Charlotte standing in my doorway. "You should come see this," she said, a mysterious smile playing at her lips. I followed her through the editorial department, where the energy had noticeably transformed. Gone was the tense silence that had characterized Marcus's reign. People were collaborating openly, engaged in animated discussions about manuscripts and marketing strategies. Several nodded or smiled as we passed. Not the nervous acknowledgement once given to authority figures, but genuine recognition between colleagues. Charlotte led me to the largest conference room, where a crowd had gathered. As we entered, conversations hushed, and all eyes turned toward us. "What's going on?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. Sarah Martinez, a senior editor who'd nearly quit 3 times under Marcus's leadership, stepped forward. "We wanted to show you something." She gestured toward the wall where a new installation had been mounted, a mosaic of book covers, each surrounded by photographs of the entire team that had brought it to life: editors, designers, marketing specialists, production managers. Every person whose creativity and effort had contributed to the final product was visibly acknowledged. "We're calling it the collaboration wall," Sarah explained. "Every successful publication will be added, with full credit to everyone involved. No more invisible contributors." I moved closer, examining the details of the display. Each team member's name was listed with their specific contributions noted. The effect was powerful, a visual representation of the collaborative nature of publishing, the antithesis of the single genius myth that Marcus had perpetuated. "This was entirely their idea," Charlotte whispered. "They organized it after hours." The lump in my throat made speaking difficult. "It's perfect," I finally managed. "Exactly what we're trying to build." Emily Chen, a young assistant editor, stepped forward nervously. "There's more. We've created a new acquisition form that tracks contributions from the first manuscript, review through publication. No one's work will go unrecognized again. And we've drafted guidelines for public attribution," added Miguel Santos from the marketing department. "Every press release, interview, and promotional material will acknowledge the actual team behind each success." The initiative they'd shown, the ownership they'd taken of the new vision, moved me deeply. This wasn't change being imposed from above. It was transformation emerging organically from people who'd been waiting for the opportunity to build something better. "Thank you," I said, looking around at their expectant faces. "This is how lasting change happens, not through mandates or policies, but through collective commitment to a different way of working. What you've created here matters." The spontaneous applause that followed wasn't for me. It was for themselves, for what they were building together. As the gathering evolved into an impromptu Friday celebration, I slipped away, needing a moment to absorb the significance of what I'd witnessed. On the building's rooftop garden, another space Marcus had reserved exclusively for executive use, but that I'd immediately opened to all employees, I found a quiet corner with a view of the river. The evening air carried the scent of blooming roses and distant rain. "Quite the revolution you've started." I turned to find James Chen, the board member whose family had been in publishing for generations. He joined me at the railing, his expression contemplative as he gazed out at the cityscape. "Not a revolution," I corrected gently. "An evolution." Back to what publishing should have been all along, a collaborative art where everyone's contribution is valued. He nodded slowly. My grandfather used to tell stories about the early days of Chen Publishing in Shanghai. Editors and authors working side by side, everyone's name on the colophon. Somewhere along the way, the industry lost that ethic. It's not just publishing, I noted. In so many creative industries, credit flows upward while actual creation happens at all levels. We've normalized a kind of systemic plagiarism and normalized the bitterness that follows. James turned to face me directly. Which makes what you've done all the more remarkable. You had every reason to seek revenge, to destroy what Marcus built. Instead, you're transforming it into something better. The observation startled me. From inside my 7-year journey, I'd been so focused on the mechanics of reclaiming what had been taken that I hadn't fully recognized the nature of what I was building in its place. Revenge would have been easier, I admitted. There were moments when burning it all down seemed simpler than reconstruction. But that would have hurt all the people Marcus had already harmed. The editors, designers, and authors who still worked here, despite everything. James smiled. The board has been discussing your position. The interim qualifier seems increasingly unnecessary. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated with an incoming call, Marcus Reynolds' name flashing on the screen. After a week of silence, the timing was uncanny. I should take this, I said, raising the phone slightly. James nodded and moved toward the door. We'll continue our conversation about your permanent appointment next week. Once alone, I answered the call. Marcus, I didn't expect to hear from you. I'm sure you didn't. His voice was tightly controlled. I've been advised not to contact you, but certain matters require direct communication. I'm listening. You've won, Olivia. The company, the building, the authors, they're all yours now. But there's something you should know before you finish rewriting history. The ominous tone triggered a flutter of unease. Go on. Charlotte Freeman's success wasn't just editorial insight. There was strategic timing, targeted marketing to specific demographics, pre-publication placement with key influencers, a comprehensive campaign that cost nearly $500,000, money that came from other authors' marketing budgets. I frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying your perfect redemption story has complications. Yes, you discovered her manuscript. Yes, your editorial work was excellent. But her meteoric rise wasn't just talent and editing. It was because I gambled the company's resources on her in ways that hurt other deserving authors. The revelation landed like a stone in still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. If true, it meant Charlotte's success had come partially at the expense of other writers, a moral complexity I hadn't considered in my narrative of justice. Why tell me this now? I asked, keeping my voice level. Because your new temple of creative attribution is built on the same compromised foundation you accused me of creating. His tone held a hint of satisfaction. Publishing has always required hard choices about resource allocation. Not everyone can be the priority. Not every contributor can be equally valued. After a pause, he continued. I've accepted my removal. I've even come to respect the strategic brilliance of your approach. But don't delude yourself that you're creating publishing utopia. The industry doesn't work that way. The call ended, leaving me staring at the darkening skyline. Marcus's claim required verification, but the possibility that it contained truth was unsettling. Had I oversimplified the narrative? Reduced a complex business reality to a morality tale of credit theft without acknowledging the necessary compromises involved in commercial publishing? The rooftop door opened behind me. Charlotte emerged, concern evident in her expression. Everything okay? You disappeared from your own celebration. I hesitated, unsure whether to share Marcus's allegation. But the new Veritas was being built, on transparency, that had to extend to difficult truths as well. Marcus just called, I began, watching her reaction carefully. He claims your first book's success was partially engineered through diverting marketing resources from other authors. Is there any truth to that? Charlotte's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something more complex. She joined me at the railing, silent for several moments before responding. I didn't know the specifics then, but I suspected something wasn't balanced. She sighed. After my third book, one of the junior marketing managers got drunk at the launch party and mentioned how they'd bet the farm on my debut. I asked questions, but everyone deflected. The confirmation stung despite my preparation for it. So we've been celebrating a narrative that's incomplete at best. No. Charlotte turned to face me directly. What Marcus did to you, taking credit for your editorial discovery, erasing your contributions, that happened exactly as you've described it. The marketing allocation doesn't change that fundamental injustice. But it complicates it, I insisted. If other authors suffered because of resources directed to your book, then that's another wrong we need to right, she finished firmly. But it doesn't invalidate what we're building here. In fact, it makes transparent attribution even more important. People should know where resources are going and why those decisions are made. Her perspective shifted something in my understanding. Perhaps the most dangerous myth wasn't that success came from a single genius, but that it could ever be entirely pure, untainted by compromise or hard choices. We need to audit the marketing allocations for the past 5 years, I said, thinking aloud. Identify any authors whose work was under-resourced and develop a remediation plan. Charlotte nodded. And establish transparent guidelines for future investment decisions. Make the process visible so everyone understands the rationale, even when they don't agree with the outcome. The challenge energized rather than defeated me. This wasn't a fatal flaw in our vision. It was an opportunity to deepen it, to acknowledge complexity, while still striving for fairness. Marcus thought, this revelation would shake my confidence, I admitted, that I'd realize I'm no different from him. But that's where he's fundamentally wrong, Charlotte countered. The difference isn't in making perfect decisions, it's in how you respond when confronted with the imperfect ones. He hid information and hoarded credit. You're seeking truth and sharing recognition. As we returned to the celebration downstairs, I felt a renewed clarity about the path forward. Building an ethical publishing company wouldn't mean avoiding difficult choices. It would mean making those choices with transparency and accountability. Monday morning brought another unexpected development. The elevator doors opened onto our floor to reveal several former employees who'd left or been pushed out during Marcus's tenure. Among them was Thomas Winters, the brilliant design director whose departure 3 years ago had significantly impacted the visual quality of our books. We heard things were changing, he explained when I greeted them in the lobby. Word travels fast in publishing circles. The returning talent was a powerful validation of our new direction. These weren't people seeking jobs out of desperation. They were accomplished professionals choosing to return because they believed in the transformation underway. In the weeks that followed, the regeneration of Veritas Publishing accelerated. The marketing audit Charlotte and I had initiated revealed systematic biases in resource allocation. Not just financial inequities, but patterns of whose work received priority attention. Armed with that knowledge, the marketing team developed new guidelines ensuring balanced investment across the entire catalog. The most profound changes weren't structural, but cultural. Editorial meetings transformed from competitive pitches, where only the loudest voices were heard, to collaborative discussions where diverse perspectives were actively sought. Credit attribution became routine rather than exceptional. Perhaps most significantly, failures and mistakes were discussed, openly, not as opportunities for blame, but as chances to learn and improve collectively. 6 weeks after the board meeting that had removed Marcus Reynolds, I received an unexpected email. The subject line read simply, "You were right." The message was brief. "Olivia, I've been reflecting on our last conversation. While I still believe you don't fully appreciate the competitive realities of the publishing industry, I've come to recognize that my approach to leadership was fundamentally flawed. Taking credit for others' work didn't make me stronger. It weakened the organization by driving away talent and fostering resentment. The attached file contains notes on several authors and editors whose contributions I minimized or erased over the years. They deserve proper acknowledgement, even belatedly. This doesn't change what happened between us, but perhaps it helps correct some other injustices along the way. Marcus Reynolds. The attached document contained dozens of names, a comprehensive accounting of creative theft spanning years. Each entry included specific contributions that had gone unrecognized and suggestions for how that recognition might be restored. I forwarded the document to Charlotte with a simple note. People can change. Her response came minutes later. Sometimes it takes losing everything to see what really matters. That afternoon, the board made my appointment as permanent CEO. Official. The announcement was met with genuine enthusiasm throughout the company. Not the forced congratulations that had characterized Marcus's tenure, but authentic support from people who believed in the direction we were taking together. In my acceptance remarks, delivered from the middle of the editorial floor rather than a podium, I acknowledged both how far we'd come and the distance still to travel. Publishing has always been about stories, finding them, refining them, sharing them with the world. But for too long, we've failed to honor the story behind the stories, the collaborative journey from manuscript to finished book. Every person in this room contributes chapters to that journey. I looked around at the faces watching me. Some who'd been with Veritas through its darkest days, others who'd returned or joined recently because of what we were building. The company we're creating together isn't perfect. We'll face difficult decisions about where to invest our resources. We'll make mistakes and have to correct course. But we'll do it with transparency, with respect for every contributor, and with the understanding that our strength comes from our collective creativity, not from any single person. The applause that followed felt like a covenant, a shared commitment to the principles we were establishing. As people returned to their work, there was a palpable sense of purpose in the air. Later that day, as sunset painted the western sky in shades of amber and rose, I stood in my office contemplating the journey that had brought me here. 7 years ago, Marcus Reynolds had fired me from Luminary Press, erasing my contributions and claiming credit for my greatest discovery. The injustice had fueled a meticulous plan for accountability, one that had culminated in owning both the building and the company he'd built. But somewhere along that path of patient retribution, the goal had transformed. What had begun as a quest for personal justice had evolved into something more significant, a vision for how publishing could operate with integrity, transparency, and proper attribution for all contributors. The text message firing me had been the catalyst for implementing a plan years in the making. Marcus never knew I owned his building until it was too late. But the true ownership that mattered wasn't of physical space or corporate titles. It was claiming authorship of our own stories, ensuring everyone's contributions were recognized, and building systems where credit flowed to its rightful recipients. As I prepared to leave for the day, Charlotte appeared in my doorway with a small package. "The first advance copy," she said, handing me her newest novel. "Turn to the acknowledgments." I opened the book to the final pages and found my name at the top of a comprehensive list of contributors. To Olivia Bennett, who first saw the potential in my work and fought for its recognition. Your belief in the power of proper attribution has transformed not just my career, but an entire publishing ecosystem. This book exists because you refuse to accept a world where some voices are amplified while others are silenced. And to the entire team at Veritas Publishing, each named below with their specific contributions. What followed was 2 full pages acknowledging everyone who had touched the book, from acquisition to editing to design to marketing. It was a public declaration of the collaborative nature of publishing, a repudiation of the single genius myth. "This is how we change the industry," Charlotte said softly. "One book at a time, one accurate acknowledgement at a time." I nodded, emotion making speech difficult. "It's beautiful." "Just like the company we're building," she smiled. "Not despite its complexities and challenges, but because of how we're facing them together." As we walked out together, passing through the transformed editorial floor where the collaboration wall now displayed dozens of successful publications with their full teams acknowledged, I reflected on the unexpected path that had led here. Marcus Reynolds had fired me via text message, never imagining I already owned his building. But the true victory wasn't in taking his company. It was in reimagining what that company could become. Some might call it revenge. I preferred to think of it as restoration, not just of my own contributions, but of a fundamental principle, that meaningful success is never a solo achievement. It's built on a foundation of recognized collaborations, transparent decisions, and shared credit for collective creativity. The building I'd purchased as leverage had become something more, a physical space where a new publishing model was taking root. The company I'd taken control of to seek justice had transformed into a laboratory for ethical business practices, and the plan I'd executed for accountability had evolved into a vision for industry-wide change. Marcus Reynolds had fired me with a text message, never knowing I owned his building. But in the end, the most powerful ownership wasn't of property or position. It was of purpose. And that was something we were all building together, one properly attributed story at a time. 1 year after Marcus Reynolds' text message dismissal, Veritas Publishing hosted its first annual recognition gala. The event wasn't held in a hotel, ballroom, or exclusive club, but in the company's completely redesigned central atrium, a space that had once housed Marcus's personal art collection, but now showcased illustrations from our most beloved books, alongside portraits of the teams that created them. Authors mingled with editors, designers chatted with marketing specialists, and production staff shared tables with executive leadership. The traditional hierarchy that had once defined the company had given way to a fluid community of creative collaborators, each essential to our collective success. As I surveyed the gathering from a quiet corner, Patricia Winters approached with 2 champagne flutes. "Quite a transformation," she observed, handing me a glass. "Do you remember what this place looked like a year ago?" I nodded, recalling the sterile corporate atmosphere that had once permeated these spaces. Crystal chandeliers, abstract art chosen to impress visitors, and very little evidence that we actually made books. "And now look at it," Patricia gestured toward the vibrant displays surrounding us. "Every wall tells the story of what you've built." "What we've built," I corrected gently. "This transformation wasn't my work alone." She smiled, acknowledging the correction. "The quarterly numbers reflect that collaborative spirit. 3 consecutive periods of double-digit growth, submissions up by 42%, and staff turnover down to industry-leading lows." The board couldn't be more pleased. The financial validation was gratifying, but it wasn't what filled me with the deepest sense of accomplishment. Looking around the room, I could see the real measure of our success in the genuine connections being formed, the animated creative discussions happening spontaneously, and the pride evident on every face. The evening's formal program began with Charlotte Freeman taking the small stage we'd erected near the atrium's center. As creative director, she had become the public face of our company's transformation, an author who understood the value of proper attribution because she'd experienced both its absence and its power. "Welcome to the first, but certainly not the last, Veritas Recognition Gala," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the space. "A year ago, this company began a journey to reinvent not just how we publish books, but how we acknowledge the people who create them." The room quieted as she continued. "Tonight isn't about celebrating a single leader or star author. It's about recognizing the constellation of talents that must align to bring a book successfully into the world. What followed was unlike any publishing event I'd ever attended. Rather than focusing exclusively on bestsellers or award winners, the recognition ceremony honored teams across our entire catalog: experimental fiction that had found passionate niche audiences, children's books that had transformed reluctant readers into enthusiasts, reference works that had become essential tools in their fields. Each team took the stage together: author, editor, designer, marketers, to share the spotlight that had traditionally been reserved for a select few. As the formal presentations concluded, Charlotte introduced a special segment. Before we continue our celebration, we want to acknowledge a fundamental truth. Transformation isn't about erasing history, but about learning from it. With that in mind, I'd like to invite Olivia Bennett to share an important initiative. I hadn't anticipated being called to the stage, but as I moved forward, I understood Charlotte's intent. Some aspects of our company's evolution needed to be addressed openly, not hidden away like shameful secrets. "Thank you, Charlotte," I began, taking my place at the microphone. "When we started rebuilding Veritas Publishing, we made a commitment to transparency, even when it's uncomfortable. That commitment extends to our own past actions as a company." I gestured toward the back of the atrium where a new digital installation had been unveiled. This interactive exhibit contains the complete publication history of Veritas and its predecessor, Luminary Press. For each title, you'll find not just the credited team members, but also those whose contributions were previously unacknowledged. The display illuminated, revealing an expansive timeline populated with book covers and names, some familiar, others long forgotten. This retrospective attribution project has taken months of research, interviews, and archive exploration. It represents our commitment to correcting the record, to ensuring that everyone who contributed to our literary legacy receives proper recognition, even belatedly. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the audience as people began to understand the scope of what we'd undertaken. Some of those newly acknowledged contributors are here tonight as our honored guests, I continued, gesturing toward a group seated near the front. Editors, designers, and marketing specialists whose work shaped books that defined their genres, yet whose names were omitted from the credits. Tonight, we correct that historical oversight. Among them sat Elaine Whitford, a 73-year-old former editor whose revolutionary approach to narrative structure had transformed a manuscript rejected by 17 publishers into a modern classic, yet whose name had been systematically removed from all public materials when the book became a phenomenon. Tonight, she received long-overdue recognition with a standing ovation that brought tears to many eyes, including my own. "This isn't just about righting past wrongs," I explained as the applause subsided. "It's about acknowledging a fundamental truth. Creative work is never the product of a single genius working in isolation. It emerges from collaboration, from the friction of diverse perspectives, from the alchemy that happens when different talents combine toward a common goal." As I returned to my seat, the celebration transitioned to its next phase, the unveiling of our Future Voices initiative, a publishing program specifically designed to amplify traditionally marginalized perspectives through collaborative mentorship. The energy in the room was electric as emerging authors were paired with experienced editorial teams committed to developing their work, while ensuring they retained both creative control and proper attribution. Later that evening, as the formal program gave way to music and conversation, I found myself on the building's rooftop garden with a small group of the company's longest-serving employees. Among them was Robert Chen, a senior designer who had witnessed the company's entire evolution. "I almost quit 6 times under Marcus," he admitted, leaning against the railing overlooking the city lights. The final straw was when he took credit for the cover concept that won the National Design Award. I had the resignation letter written. "What made you stay?" I asked, genuinely curious. Robert smiled. "Hope is a stubborn thing. Even in the darkest periods, I kept believing that eventually things would change, that the work itself, the books we were creating, mattered more than the politics. Sarah Martinez, who had helped create the original collaboration wall, nodded agreement. There were always pockets of resistance, small ways we tried to preserve the true collaborative spirit of publishing despite the top-down culture. When you took over, it felt like those underground values suddenly had oxygen to grow. Their perspective resonated deeply. What we'd built wasn't created from nothing. It had germinated from seeds of collaborative spirit that had always existed, within the company, awaiting the right conditions to flourish. "Do you ever hear from him?" Miguel Santos asked, voicing the question many still wondered but few dared to ask directly. "From Marcus?" I considered how to answer, aware that my response would shape how people processed our shared history. "Occasionally," I acknowledged. "He's consulting now, working with publishing startups in Europe. The document he sent listing unacknowledged contributors was just the beginning. He's been surprisingly helpful with the retrospective attribution project." The revelation visibly surprised them. The narrative of Marcus as irredeemable villain was simpler, more satisfying in some ways than the complex reality of a flawed leader gradually confronting the consequences of his actions. "People can change," I continued, "especially when they're given the opportunity to be part of restoration rather than simply targets of retribution." Marcus made serious mistakes, caused real harm to many careers, but the goal was never to destroy him. It was to transform the system that enabled his approach to leadership. Miguel shook his head slowly. "Still, the poetic justice of it all, him firing you by text, not knowing you owned his building. You can't deny there's a perfect narrative, symmetry there." I smiled, acknowledging the observation. Life rarely offers such neat resolutions. The text message was just a catalyst, the culmination of a pattern that had become unsustainable. What matters isn't the satisfying symmetry of that moment, but what we've built since then. As the conversation shifted to upcoming projects and creative challenges, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The path from fired editor to building owner to CEO had been neither straight nor simple. At each juncture, choices presented themselves: to pursue revenge or restoration, to simplify narratives or embrace complexity, to claim individual credit or acknowledge collective achievement. The real transformation hadn't been in the corporate structure or attribution policies, important as those changes were. It had been in recognizing that meaningful success was never about winning a zero-sum game where one person's advancement required another's diminishment. True success emerged from creating conditions where everyone could contribute fully and be recognized appropriately. Around midnight, as the celebration began winding down, Charlotte joined me on the rooftop. We stood in companionable silence, watching the city lights reflect on the river's dark surface. "I've been thinking about narratives," she said finally. "As a novelist, I'm trained to craft satisfying story arcs, conflict, climax, resolution, but real life rarely follows such tidy patterns." "How so?" I asked, curious about her train of thought. "If this were one of my novels, your story would end with Marcus's downfall, the sweet justice of the overlooked employee becoming the boss, the perfect revenge of the building owner evicting the man who fired her. Credits roll, audience satisfied." I nodded, understanding her point. But that wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning of the actual work. "Exactly." Charlotte turned to face me directly. "The most important part of your story, of our collective story, isn't what happened a year ago. It's what we've built since then. The hundreds of daily decisions and interactions that have gradually transformed how we work together." Her observation crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't fully articulated. The dramatic confrontation with Marcus, the moment when power dynamics had visibly shifted, had been merely prologue to the more significant journey of reconstruction. "The media still loves the dramatic version," I noted wryly. "Building owner. Fires CEO who fired her. It's a headline that sells. Because it's simpler, Charlotte agreed. Revenge narratives are emotionally satisfying because they promise closure, a neat ending where accounts are settled. But they're also limiting. They trap everyone in fixed roles: villain, victim, victor. I considered her words, recognizing their truth. The real story isn't about those roles at all, is it? It's about the possibility of transformation, not just for individuals, but for entire systems. Charlotte smiled. That's what makes it worth telling. Not because it offers the momentary satisfaction of revenge, but because it demonstrates that sustainable change is possible, even in industries with deeply entrenched practices. As we prepared to rejoin the remaining guests downstairs, Charlotte paused at the door. By the way, have you seen the latest submission numbers? They're extraordinary. Patricia mentioned growth, but I haven't seen the detailed breakdown. It's not just quantity, it's the diversity of voices. Authors who would never have approached Veritas under the old regime are specifically seeking us out because of our attribution and collaborative development model. We're getting manuscripts that would have gone to indie presses because writers trust we won't erase their voices. The information was deeply affirming. Beyond financial metrics or industry recognition, this represented the true measure of our success, creating a publishing home where authentic voices could flourish without fear of erasure or exploitation. The following morning, I arrived early, at the office, wanting quiet moments to reflect before the workday began. The atrium still bore evidence of the previous night's celebration. The exhibition remained illuminated, its interactive displays highlighting the newly complete historical record of our company's creative contributions. As I moved through the space, a particular name on the display caught my attention. Elena Winters, Associate Editor, 1987-1992. I touched the screen, expanding her profile to reveal a list of titles she had shaped, authors she had discovered, innovative editorial approaches she had pioneered, all previously uncredited. My mother. I turned to find James Chen standing behind me, gazing at the display with an unreadable expression. Elena Winters was your mother? I asked, surprised by the connection. He nodded. She died never seeing her name on the book she helped create. When I joined the board of Veritas, it was partly to understand the industry that had simultaneously shaped her life and erased her contributions. The revelation added new dimension to James's consistent support for our transformation initiatives. This wasn't just abstract corporate governance for him, it was personal. The retrospective attribution project means more than I can express, he continued quietly. Not because it changes the past, but because it ensures those patterns won't continue into the future. His words echoed my own thinking about the true purpose of our work. The past couldn't be undone. Credits couldn't be retroactively added to books long out of print. Careers couldn't be retrospectively launched with proper recognition. But we could ensure that future generations of creative contributors wouldn't experience the same systematic erasure. As employees began arriving for the day, the atmosphere carried a lingering energy from the previous night's celebration. People greeted each other with renewed purpose, carrying the spirit of recognition into their daily interactions. In my office, I found a small package on my desk, unwrapped, with a simple note attached. Sometimes restoration comes in unexpected forms. Mr. Inside was a leather-bound first edition of Charlotte's debut novel, The Echo Chamber. Opening the cover revealed something extraordinary, a previously unseen acknowledgement page, apparently removed before publication. To Olivia Bennett, whose editorial insight transformed this manuscript from promising to publishable. Her unwavering belief in my voice made this book possible. The page had been excised from the final version, a deliberate erasure that had shaped both Charlotte's career trajectory and my own. Marcus returning it now represented something more meaningful than a simple apology. It was tangible evidence that the narrative could be corrected, that what had been hidden could be revealed. Later that morning, in our weekly editorial meeting, I shared a perspective that had been crystallizing through the anniversary celebrations. A year ago, we began this journey with a focus on attribution, ensuring that everyone who contributes to a book's creation receives proper credit. That remains fundamental to who we are. But I've come to understand that attribution is just the visible manifestation of something deeper: respect for the collaborative nature of creativity itself. The room quieted as I continued. When we acknowledge every contributor appropriately, we're not just adding names to a list, we're recognizing a fundamental truth about how meaningful work happens through the interaction of diverse talents, perspectives, and skills. No book is the product of a single genius. No company succeeds through one person's brilliance. Sarah Martinez nodded thoughtfully. It changes how we approach the work itself. When everyone knows they'll be properly credited, collaboration becomes natural rather than threatening. People share ideas freely because they're not afraid of having them appropriated. Exactly, I agreed. The culture shift we're experiencing isn't just about fairness in recognition, though that matters deeply. It's about creating conditions where authentic collaboration can flourish. As the meeting transitioned to specific manuscript discussions, I observed the transformed dynamics in the room. Junior editors offered perspectives that senior staff thoughtfully considered. Designers and marketers contributed insights that shaped editorial decisions. The artificial boundaries between departments had softened, replaced by a fluid exchange of ideas focused on creating the best possible books. That evening, preparing to leave the office, I paused at the window overlooking the city. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. 1 year after the text message that had changed everything, Veritas Publishing had been transformed from a hierarchical organization where credit flowed upward to a collaborative community where contribution was recognized regardless of position. The journey had begun with a single catalyst: a dismissive text message from a boss who didn't know I owned his building. But it had evolved into something far more significant: a reimagining of how creative work could be structured, credited, and valued. As I gathered my things to leave, Charlotte appeared in the doorway, manuscript in hand. I've been thinking about what you said this morning, about attribution being the visible manifestation of respect for collaborative creativity, she began. It reminded me of something I've observed as both an author and now as creative director. What's that? I asked, intrigued. The companies and leaders most obsessed with claiming individual credit are often those contributing the least actual value. The more someone insists on solo recognition, the less they've typically created themselves. Her observation resonated profoundly. Marcus Reynolds' insistence on claiming credit for others' work hadn't been a sign of strength but of fundamental insecurity, a fear that his own contributions weren't sufficient without appropriating others. The strongest leaders, Charlotte continued, are those secure enough to shine the spotlight on others. Their value isn't diminished by acknowledging collaborative achievement, it's amplified by it. As we walked out together, passing through the atrium where the retrospective attribution project continued illuminating previously hidden contributions, I reflected on the unexpected path that had led here. What had begun as a quest for personal justice had evolved into a movement for systemic change, not just within our company, but potentially across an industry long overdue for transformation. Marcus Reynolds had fired me via text message, never knowing I owned his building. That moment of poetic justice had provided momentary satisfaction, but the true victory wasn't in the reversal of power. It was in reimagining what power itself could mean, not control over others, but the capacity to create conditions where everyone could contribute fully and be recognized completely. The company we were building wasn't perfect. Challenges remained. Difficult decisions still arose. and the publishing industry's entrenched practices wouldn't transform overnight. But each day brought us closer to a model where success wasn't measured by who received credit, but by how widely that credit was shared. A model that recognized the fundamental truth that the most meaningful achievements are never solo accomplishments, but collaborative creations. As we stepped into the evening air, the Riverview Tower gleamed in the last light of day. Not just a building I happened to own, but a space where a new vision of creative work was taking root. The text message dismissal that had catalyzed this journey had long since faded from my phone, but its impact continued to reverberate, not as an ending, but as the beginning of a story still being written, one properly attributed contributor at a time. 5 years after the text message that changed everything, I stood on the stage at the National Publishers Association conference, surveying the packed auditorium. Industry leaders from across the globe had gathered for my keynote address on the Attribution Revolution, transforming publishing through collaborative recognition. What had begun as one company's internal transformation had sparked a movement that was gradually reshaping the entire industry. When I received that text message firing me 5 years ago, I began. I never imagined it would lead to this moment. I certainly never envisioned standing before you as the founder of the Collaborative Publishing Alliance, representing over 40 publishing houses committed to transparent attribution and ethical creative practices. The journey from that moment of personal injustice to industry-wide advocate had been neither linear nor simple. The path had been filled with unexpected challenges, powerful resistance from entrenched interests, and surprising allies who emerged from unlikely places. The traditional publishing model operated on what I call the singular genius myth, the belief that breakthrough creative work emerges primarily from exceptional individuals working in isolation. This myth conveniently allowed credit and compensation to concentrate at the top, while rendering invisible the collaborative networks that actually produce our most valuable work. As I spoke, digital displays behind me showcased the transformed ecosystem we'd helped create, attribution matrices that mapped every contributor's role in a book's development, transparent compensation structures that ensured financial rewards flowed to all who created value, mentorship programs that elevated emerging voices without appropriating their work. The question that drove our initial transformation at Veritas, publishing wasn't how do we assign credit, but how do we tell the truth about how books are actually created? Once we committed to that fundamental honesty, everything else, attribution policies, compensation structures, collaborative workflows, emerged naturally from that core principle. From my vantage point on stage, I could see familiar faces throughout the audience. Charlotte Freeman sat in the front row, now a best-selling author of 12 novels and the chair of our industry ethics committee. Next to her was Thomas Winters, whose pioneering work in collaborative design had transformed visual storytelling across multiple publishing houses. Sarah Martinez had become the CEO of Veritas when I stepped down to launch the alliance, continuing our commitment to transparent attribution while expanding into new markets. The data is unequivocal, I continued, advancing to the next slide in my presentation. Publishing houses that have adopted full attribution models have seen substantive improvements across every key metric: staff retention up 64%, submission, quality increased by 48%, and perhaps most convincingly for those still skeptical, average profit margins improved by 22% compared to traditional models. Those numbers represented thousands of individual stories, careers launched without exploitation, creative collaborations that flourished because each contributor knew they would receive proper recognition, readers who developed deeper connections to books because they understood the full human ecosystem that created them. But the most profound transformation can't be captured in statistics, I acknowledged, stepping away from the podium to address the audience more directly. It's in the fundamental shift in how we understand creative work itself, not as the product of exceptional individuals, but as the emergence of something greater than the sum of its parts when diverse talents combine with mutual respect. After the keynote, the conference transitioned to breakout sessions focused on practical implementation of attribution models across different publishing sectors. I made my way to a small meeting room where a private gathering had been arranged. A reconciliation circle bringing together executives who had lost positions during the attribution revolution and emerging leaders who were building the new paradigm. Marcus Reynolds was among them, older now and notably humbler than the man who had fired me by text message half a decade earlier. He'd spent the past 3 years consulting with traditional publishing houses transitioning to collaborative models, helping them navigate the cultural and structural changes required. His intimate knowledge of the old system, combined with his willingness to acknowledge its flaws, had made him an unexpected but effective change agent. The resistance isn't really about attribution, he was explaining to a group of young executives as I entered. It's about the threat to identity. I spent decades believing that my value came from being the singular decision maker, the name above the title. Dismantling that myth meant confronting profound questions about who I was, if not the genius behind the success. His vulnerability in that moment, the honest reflection on how power had shaped his self-conception, struck me deeply. 5. Years ago, I had seen Marcus as the villain in a simple narrative of justice. Now I recognized him as another human navigating the complex terrain of an industry in transformation. Olivia, he acknowledged as I joined the circle. Your keynote was compelling, particularly the case studies from smaller presses. Thank you, Marcus. I've been following your work with the transition team at Meridian Publishing. I hear you've made remarkable progress with their attribution matrices. The cordial exchange wouldn't have seemed noteworthy to others in the room, but it represented a journey neither of us could have imagined when I stood in his office 5 years earlier, revealing that I owned his building. The narrative of Nemesis had evolved into something more nuanced. Former adversaries now allied in transforming the industry that had shaped both our lives. As the session progressed, I observed the dynamic between established industry figures and emerging leaders. The conversation wasn't framed as old versus new, but as a collective exploration of how to preserve what was valuable in publishing traditions while evolving beyond the exploitative patterns that had diminished so many contributions. The most difficult transition for me, admitted Eleanor Richards, former CEO of a major literary imprint, was learning to value what I actually contributed rather than what I controlled. In the old model, my worth was measured by how many decisions required my approval. Now, I measure it by how many people I've helped develop to the point where they no longer need that approval. Her insight resonated around the circle, a perfect articulation of the shift from power over to power with that characterized the attribution revolution. Leadership was being redefined not as control, but as cultivation, creating conditions where collaborative creativity could flourish. After the session concluded, Charlotte joined me for a walk through the conference center's garden courtyard. The late afternoon sun filtered through flowering trees, creating patterns of light and shadow on the stone pathway. Did you ever imagine this 5 years ago? She asked, gesturing toward the conference building where thousands of publishing professionals were engaged in discussions about attribution ethics, collaborative workflows, and transparent compensation. That your response to a dismissive text message would catalyze an industry-wide transformation? I shook my head, smiling at the improbability of it all. I was focused on justice in one specific case, addressing the wrong done to me and others, at one company. The broader implications didn't become clear until we started seeing the results of our new model at Veritas. The timing was perfect, Charlotte observed. The industry was already at a tipping point. Digital disruption had exposed the weaknesses in traditional publishing structures. Authors were questioning the value proposition of established houses. Editors and designers were leaving for independent platforms where their contributions would be recognized. She was right. Our transformation at Veritas hadn't occurred in isolation, but had intersected with broader currents of change already, moving through the industry. What we'd provided was a viable alternative, a practical demonstration that publishing could operate successfully while properly attributing and compensating all contributors. The building was the perfect metaphor, I reflected. Owning the physical space that housed Marcus's company gave me leverage to initiate change. But the real transformation wasn't about property ownership. It was about reimagining the invisible, structures that determine how creative work is valued and credited. As we continued walking, we encountered James Chen engaged in animated conversation with a group of young editors from emerging markets. He excused himself to join us, his expression reflecting genuine pleasure at the reunion. The international panel was extraordinary, he reported. Publishers from Seoul, Lagos, Buenos Aires, and Mumbai, all implementing variations of the attribution matrix, each adapting it to their cultural context while maintaining the core principles. The global spread of the attribution movement had been one of the most surprising and gratifying developments of the past few years. What had begun in one Portland publishing house had resonated with creative communities around the world, each adapting the fundamental principles to their specific cultural and economic environments. Any resistance? Charlotte asked. James nodded. Always, particularly from conglomerates with highly concentrated ownership, but they're increasingly isolated. Authors are specifically seeking publishers with transparent attribution policies. Editorial talent is migrating to houses where their contributions will be properly recognized. Market forces were now accelerating the transformation we'd initiated. As creators and creative workers voted with their feet, choosing to work with publishers committed to proper attribution, even reluctant companies were being forced to evolve or lose access to the best talent and content. That evening, the conference hosted a gala celebrating pioneers of the attribution revolution. The event honored not just recent innovators, but historical figures who had advocated for proper creative recognition throughout publishing's evolution. Among those recognized posthumously was Elena Winters, James Chen's mother, whose early advocacy for editorial attribution had cost her career advancement, but planted seeds that would eventually flourish. As I watched James accept the recognition, on his mother's behalf, I reflected on the intergenerational nature of meaningful change. Elena Winters hadn't lived to see her vision realized, but her influence continued through her son's governance work and through every attribution policy that acknowledged the full spectrum of creative contribution. The evening's most powerful moment came when a group of junior editors, designers, and marketing specialists from across the industry took the stage together. They represented the first generation to build their careers entirely within the new paradigm, professionals who had never known a publishing environment where their contributions would go unrecognized. "We inherit the benefits of a battle we didn't have to fight," their spokesperson acknowledged. A transformation initiated by those who endured the worst aspects of the old system, but refused to perpetuate it. Our commitment is to extend this revolution beyond attribution to address the remaining inequities in publishing, ensuring that proper recognition flows not just to those in established positions, but to voices and perspectives historically excluded from our industry altogether. Their vision expanded what we had begun, moving beyond proper credit for existing contributors to fundamental questions about whose work was being published at all. The attribution revolution wasn't an endpoint, but a foundation for addressing deeper structural inequities throughout the creative ecosystem. Later that night, I found myself on the hotel's rooftop terrace with an unlikely gathering: Marcus Reynolds, Charlotte Freeman, Sarah Martinez, and several other key figures from different phases of our journey. The conversation flowed with remarkable ease, free from the tension that might have been expected given our complicated history. "I've been thinking about watersheds," Marcus said during a lull in the conversation. "Those points where a system undergoes fundamental transformation rather than incremental change. Like the shift from individual attribution to collaborative recognition," Charlotte suggested. Marcus nodded. Exactly. But watersheds are complex. They're never caused by a single factor. They require multiple pressures converging at the right moment. His observation echoed my own reflections on the movement we'd helped create. The text message firing, me had been a catalyst, and my ownership of the building had provided leverage for initial change. But the transformation had succeeded because it addressed fundamental problems many people had already recognized: the systematic erasure of contributions, the concentration of credit and compensation at the top, the fiction of the singular. Creative genius. The old model was already failing, Sarah pointed out. Economically, creatively, ethically. It couldn't attract or retain the best talent because it fundamentally misrepresented how creative work happens. And yet, it persisted. For generations, I noted. Systems can continue long after they've stopped serving their ostensible purpose, as long as they serve the interests of those with power to maintain them. Marcus looked at me directly. That was my blind spot. I confused power with value, believed my worth came from controlling the narrative rather than contributing to it. That text message I sent you. He shook his head, still incredulous at his past arrogance. I never imagined it would lead to all this. That's how change often works, Charlotte observed. Not through grand plans, but through individual moments where someone refuses to accept an unjust status quo. As the conversation continued under the starlit sky, I reflected on the extraordinary journey from that moment of dismissal to this gathering of collaborators. The narrative that had begun as a simple story of retribution, building owner fires, CEO who fired her, had evolved into something far richer and more consequential. A fundamental reimagining of how creative work could be structured, credited, and valued. The following morning, the final day of the conference, I participated in a panel discussion with emerging industry leaders focused on the future of attribution. The conversation quickly moved beyond publishing to explore how collaborative recognition models were influencing adjacent creative industries: film, music, digital media, game development. The attribution revolution isn't contained within publishing, noted Zara Williams, a 32-year-old film producer who had adapted our matrix model for screen credits. It's addressing a fundamental question across creative industries. How do we tell the truth about how creative work actually happens? That framing, attribution as truth-telling rather than reward allocation, had been crucial to the movement's success. When positioned as simply asking for fair recognition, attribution initiatives could be dismissed as special interest pleading. But when framed as a commitment to accuracy and transparency about how creative work emerges, they appealed to shared values across otherwise divided constituencies. The next frontier isn't just who gets credited, contributed Miguel Santos, who had developed Veritas Publishing's digital attribution system before launching his own platform for interactive storytelling. It's transforming how we understand creativity itself, moving beyond the myth of individual genius to recognize the networked, collaborative nature of all meaningful innovation. His vision extended what we had begun in tangible ways, developing technologies and platforms that made visible the collaborative processes traditionally hidden behind the fiction of singular authorship, interactive reading experiences that revealed the editorial conversations shaping a text, transparent development histories that showed how stories evolved through collective refinement, attribution visualizations that mapped the complex web of influences and contributions behind every published work. As the panel concluded, I found myself reflecting on the distance traveled since that text message notification had illuminated my phone screen 5 years earlier. What had begun as a personal response to injustice had connected with currents of change already moving through the creative ecosystem, catalyzing a transformation that continued to expand in unexpected directions. The conference's closing session brought together participants from across the publishing spectrum, executives and assistants, best-selling authors and debut novelists, independent presses and major houses. As I looked out across the gathered community, I was struck by the fundamental shift in how people related to one another. The quality of attention, the genuine recognition, the collaborative energy that flowed when everyone's contributions were properly valued. The attribution revolution is often described in terms of policies and matrices, I noted in my closing remarks. But its essence isn't procedural, it's relational. It's about how we see and acknowledge each other's contributions to our collective, creative endeavors. That evening, as the conference concluded and participants prepared to return to publishing houses around the world, I received an unexpected message. Not a text this time, but a handwritten note delivered to my hotel room. Olivia, 5 years ago, I fired you via text message, never imagining you owned the building housing my company. I believed that singular act of dismissal would be the end of our professional connection. Instead, it became the catalyst for a transformation neither of us could have envisioned. What began as your justified response to an injustice has evolved into something that transcends both of us. A fundamental reimagining of how creative work can be structured, recognized, and valued. The attribution revolution isn't your achievement, or mine. It belongs to everyone who has contributed to its evolution. That seems fitting for a movement founded on the recognition that meaningful creation is always collaborative. With respect and gratitude for the journey, Marcus Reynolds. The note captured perfectly the distance we had traveled, from adversaries in a simple narrative of revenge to collaborators in a complex journey of industry transformation. The text, message that had once represented the height of dismissive arrogance, had become merely the opening line in a story neither of us could have imagined writing. As I prepared to leave the conference city the following morning, I took a final walk through the downtown district. The urban landscape was dotted with bookstores, some independent, some chain outlets, all displaying prominently the new generation of books produced under attribution models that properly recognized every contributor. Passing a small independent shop, I paused to examine the display window featuring the Collaborative Library, a curated collection of titles whose innovative attribution practices had expanded our understanding of how creative work emerges. Beside each book was a visualization mapping the web of contributors who had shaped it, not just author and editor, but sensitivity readers, early manuscript reviewers, designers, and others whose insights had influenced the final work. The same display embodied everything we had been working toward, not just proper credit allocation, but a more honest and complete understanding of how meaningful creative work actually happens. The fiction of the singular genius had given way to a more complex, but ultimately more accurate recognition of creativity as an inherently collaborative process. 5 years after a dismissive text message from a boss who didn't know I owned his building, the publishing landscape had been transformed. What had begun as a personal quest for justice had connected with currents of change already moving through the creative ecosystem, catalyzing a revolution that continued to expand in directions none of us could have predicted. The attribution revolution wasn't complete. Significant challenges remained, particularly in extending proper recognition beyond established positions to historically marginalized voices and perspectives. But the fundamental shift had occurred, from a system designed to concentrate credit and compensation at the top to one committed to recognizing the distributed, collaborative nature of all creative achievement. As I continued my walk through the awakening city, I reflected on the unexpected journey from that moment of dismissal to this ongoing transformation. The text message firing me had been merely the catalyst. The building ownership had provided leverage for initial change. But the movement's enduring power came from a simple commitment to telling the truth about how creative work actually happens, recognizing that our most valuable achievements never emerge from individual genius alone, but from the extraordinary alchemy that occurs when diverse talents combine with mutual respect and proper recognition. Marcus Reynolds had fired me via text message, never knowing I owned his building. That moment of poetic justice had provided momentary satisfaction, but the true victory wasn't in the reversal of power. It was in reimagining what power itself could mean, Not control over others, but the capacity to create conditions where everyone could contribute fully, be recognized appropriately, and participate in the collaborative creation of something greater than any of us could achieve alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.